afternoon, everyone. Quetica Consulting welcomes you to our latest webinar in our Supply Chain and Transportation Educational Series. Our goal is to leverage our hands-on and practical expertise, learning from our consulting practice, and knowledge of industry best practices to deliver educational and informative research and events. Today's topic is Challenges and Opportunities in Inbound Management. The presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, and we will allow 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. All participants in the webinar will be muted during the session. If you have a question that you would like to have answered during the Q&A period, please enter it at any time during the presentation in the chat window. You will find it on the left-hand side of your screen. A copy of the white paper from today's session can also be downloaded from the chat window. During the webinar, we will discuss the objectives of the session, discuss the opportunity for managing inbound transportation, review different inbound management methodologies and their pros and cons, and end the session with a discussion of how to leverage the opportunities and move towards an optimized inbound management model. Joining us today is Richard Langer. Rick is the Managing Director of Quetica Consulting, a veteran-owned business, led by industry experts with deep expertise in supply chain management, information technology, global trade, and payments. Having founded and managed the PowerTrack network, including freight audit and payment software, supply chain consulting, third-party logistics, and a global trade bank, Rick brings a breadth of deep expertise to help commercial clients and government agencies across the global marketplace efficiently and effectively achieve sustainable cost reduction and better service levels. Also joining us today is Christopher Wilkins. Chris is the supply chain and logistics technology specialist. His expertise and focus throughout his career has been to remove costs from a company's supply chain while delivering both meaningful and measurable information. For the past 10 years, Chris has focused on synchronizing the timelines between the financial and the physical supply chains. He has worked with customers to transform their operations through the cost management processes associated with the movement of goods. I will now turn the webinar over to Chris to start the session.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We'll start by just going over the objectives. And what we want to do today is we want to discuss the differences in the current inbound process for companies. We're going to take a high look at it. We're not going to dig deep down, but it's just going to be a cursory look at the four that we've identified that we want to talk about today. And then identify the opportunity for any of these along this line, along their level of maturity to reach that optimized inbound method. And of course, always end up talking about what's the savings, what's the opportunity that exists with regards to dollars for a company to achieve that. The opportunity for managed inbound really exists because it's such a large portion of a company's freight spend. To be able to understand that, we took a look at something that Aberdeen put out there last year that says that this is a focus for 75% of the businesses, and the reason why is because it's such a large part of their business. When you take and break down what it means to a company with regards to their cost of goods sold, meaning how does freight and the cost of freight fit into that? And you can see that it's anywhere between 3 and 8% of cost of goods sold. So what that means is if a company does take that into consideration or make it a key focus, they could really impact their bottom line of their company. They could affect their business anywhere from 15 to 50% of their spend cost currently today. And that's really a reason why it's such a large focus, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk a little bit about this today. So we've identified 4 different methodologies we're going to go over today, 2 prepaid models and 2 collect models, each one of them progressively getting more detailed and requiring higher levels of technology, but each one progressively getting you a bigger return on your investment and a change in your business, complete change in your business. The first one we're going to take a look at is the prepaid and allowed model. This is basically where they absorb the cost of the freight into the cost of the goods. So if a procurement part of the organization decides that they're going to contract with a supplier, the supplier then will in turn give them the price of the goods with a fully landed freight cost in it. So there's no distinction between what the cost of the goods were and what any cost to manage the transportation to get it there. If we were to take this model and kind of draw it on a board, what it would look like, we would be able to see that in the beginning, what I do is I contact my supplier and say, hey, I'd like to put out a contract with you for whatever goods that I want from you for over a period of time. They then look at their current contracts with their carriers to be able to service the need in that lane, or they go out and they make new contracts with carriers to be able to do this. They give us a price and they say, okay, here's what it is. And we say, that's great. We're going to send you a purchase order now for however many goods we want over this short period of time. Now, my contract may be for a couple of years, but this purchase order, each purchase order is unique, and it will be over the next couple of years. So if I send them a purchase order, they're then going to say, okay, I need to ship this to you, and they're going to prepare to ship it. And they can do it in a number of ways. They can ship it directly off their floor, or they can ship it from a distribution center that they may contract or have. Either way, they create a communication to the floor or the DC to be able to prepare that order for shipment. They prepare the order for shipment, and they also prepare the carrier for shipment as well. So they communicate with the carrier to pick it up and deliver it. The transaction is ready. It's ready to go. It's shipped, and as soon as it ships, they send us an invoice. And the invoice says, hey, look, this is for whatever it is that you purchased from us on this purchase order. We have no distinction of whether or not what it costs or when it's going to be there or how they're getting it there. None of that is visible to us. All we know is a truck shows up at our door at some point after we got an invoice for purchasing the goods. Now, if you take a look at this model, all of the activity that exists on the supplier side, including the communication from the carrier that they did deliver it, and any information back and forth with regard to the cost, including the payment to the carrier. It all exists on the supplier side, and we have nothing on our side. So what we're doing is we're depending upon the supplier completely and totally to manage this process and to do it effectively because they have all the data. Because remember, if you think about it, wherever we go to manage our process and reduce costs out of it, the first piece of that is with regards to data. Having and handling the data is the thing that will allow us to do this. So that gives us some pros and it gives us some cons. The pros being, I don't have to manage any of the trade documents. We're not receiving invoices. We're not receiving contracts. I don't have to file the contract. I don't have to manage any of that. And this is very compatible if I have a varied purchasing environment, meaning I have multiple suppliers and I'm buying from mostly on a one-off basis. If I have relatively few that do 80% of my business, then it can have room. There's where you have room for improvement. The cons are I'm depending upon my supplier to negotiate a rate for shipment that is a very good rate that will save us, that we don't have to pay extra or they don't have to pay extra to haul, subsequently marking up the transaction. They mark up the transaction to cover a lot of issues that may exist in the supply chain on a future and ongoing and future basis. And what that means is they take all the risk. They have to call the carrier. They have to make sure it gets there. They have to make sure that whatever they quoted us over a 4 or 5 year period for the goods, the cost of the freight doesn't exceed profitability on their part. So they're going to mark up this transaction, the cost of the goods, to cover anything like that over that 5 year period. And we are dependent upon them them sending the goods to us in a timely fashion that meets our requirements for our customers, whether we're manufacturing the goods, whether we're just a distribution company and shipping the goods off to our final customer. We have no visibility to we have no way to affect their shipments to us to be able to meet the requirements of our traffic management. So, no say in the carriers they use. They could be using carriers that don't meet the required insurance level that we would like to have, or carriers that may have a safety policy that is part of the corporate governance of our business as well. And we can't take advantage of optimizing loads across vendors that may be within that line of that supply chain or en route of that supply chain. So we go from prepay and allow to prepay and add, which is another method that some companies employ. The difference between prepay and add, or prepay and allow and add, is that with add, I'm at least getting a dollar amount associated with the transportation cost on my invoice that the supplier has submitted to us. So I'm able to say, okay, I can do a bit of accruals, and I can also determine what freight portion of cost of goods sold is to a certain extent. This again is called prepay and add, so it becomes visible. If I were to draw it on a board, what it would look like, again, it looks a lot like what we did with prepay and allow. The only difference with prepay and add and prepay and allow is when I get that invoice from that supplier, they have a line item that says $1,000 for transportation. Now, what that gives me is the ability to audit against the standard. So let's say when I negotiated the contract with the supplier, they said, yeah, transportation will be $1,000. So my opportunity is to be able to say anytime the transportation on the invoice exceeds $1,000, I can kick it back. Now, keeping in mind that it's probably still marked up, so it's not really the true transportation amount. And I get to, now when I get that invoice, I get to take that piece off of there and do a little accounting distribution, which is helpful because I can distribute it across the multiple items and get some visibility into that cost. So those are really the only differences, and I'm starting to get just a little bit of piece of data for me to be able to make some decisions to affect my costs and my profitability. Now, the pros and the cons with this are, the pros are I have visibility of transportation cost versus material charges cost to a certain extent. I can manage I don't have to manage the transportation process of this still. It's still outsourced to my suppliers through their relationship with my procurement company. I have still no need to manage the trade documentation. I'm not going to get invoices. I'm not going to get contracts to have to manage and audit and update. So you know, we still are giving all of that information over to our suppliers to manage. Now, the downside is audit reconciliation of supplemental invoices don't exist. And what I mean by that is if I'm going to get a distributed line item that says this is what my freight was, if the supplier has visibility to that and they know that they've gone over on that cost, I'm going to get a supplemental invoice for that difference, whether it's from them or their carrier. And I have no ability to reconcile that. So it becomes an accounting line item that sits out there that I don't know what to do with. The supplier has the ability to negotiate still. They're negotiating their rates with their carriers, and I'm paying the bill for it. They're still marking it up, and I still have no say in what carriers they're using or the ability to take advantage of anything that goes en route in my supply chain. Now, I'm also still at the mercy of the supplier on my traffic management or my supply chain management process, meaning whatever my commitment is to get my my goods to my customers is totally reliant on their timing and their ability to get me the goods that I have no visibility to. So some companies say, well, you know what, we're not going to do any of the prepaid business. We're just going to try to do collect. We're going to collect all of our shipments that come inbound. We're going to audit and pay those bills and try to match those up to the purchasing. And basically every invoice that, or every shipment that comes in from the supplier was going to have a collect terms on it. So the buyer, I'm responsible for finding the carriers and negotiating the rates. I'm responsible for making sure that the timing exists out, that I can negotiate with carriers that, one, are going to be there, two, that the vendor finds easy to use and be able to meet my supply chain needs. So I now then have to communicate the list of carriers that I've approved and asked the suppliers, all of the suppliers, to use. And I have to supply them with that list and ensure that they use them and use them on a regular basis. So like we did before, we're going to draw this out on a board, and we're going to say, okay, let's take a look at what this looks like and how it exists. And a lot of it is starting to shift. We're starting to see a little bit more of the activity and data on the buyer side here, because frankly, we are starting to take advantage of this process. We're going to contract with the carriers. We're going to notify the carriers that they have the lane. We're going to receive the information from the carriers on the shipment and the delivery, and of course, we're going to audit and pay the bills for the carriers. So we're starting to get more active, and we're starting to see more activity, and we've also supplied the suppliers with a routing guide that helps them determine what carriers to use. And there's multiple methods of routing guides that they can use that we can do this, depending on, one, our ability, and two, their ability to communicate in a more sophisticated electronic fashion. So with Collect, we have, again, some pros and we have some cons. The pros are, I'm getting to negotiate my rates. So before, in the prepaid model, the suppliers negotiated rates without any concern on what my costs were. In this model, I get to negotiate them with that concern in mind. What a point is that we get to take advantage of with regards to cost saving. I get to determine who the carriers that we're using now. We are saying we only want to use certain carriers, types of carriers, carriers with certain safety records, and carriers with certain levels of insurance. And I can manage that on my side, because that helps our corporate governance as well. And then we get to manage the routing guide with the supplier and provide them with some idea of who to use and how to use it. So that gives us visibility of the cost, and it gives us visibility also to any audit that exists, giving us the opportunity to drive some cost savings in our business with our contracts with our carriers and with our suppliers. Now, the downside is, well, in my situation, even though I'm paying the bills, I'm not able at this point yet to take advantage of any consolidation in my physical supply chain. So anything en route, anything that's close by, I don't get the opportunity to do that. This is still a one-to-one, one purchase order to one movement of the goods, or multiple movements of the goods under that one purchase order. I'm dependent upon the suppliers using my routing guide, meaning I'm going to supply them with a routing guide that says, hey, you guys need to use these carriers. And if you remember from those slides that we had where we looked at what it would look like, they're not always shipping from their location. So they're going to have to provide it to folks that they have relationships with and hope that they use it. So that's getting one more level divorced from us that we have control over. Now, I have a couple of ways that we can do this. Manage these routing guides, either through spreadsheet, or we can load it into their TMS, which may help, and we can load it into our TMS, which may help. But what it comes down to is utilization. Are they going to utilize that routing guide and use those carriers that we negotiated with? Because the more they use, the more that savings that we get to take advantage of. The less they use, of course, the more it costs us. And we still don't have visibility to the timing, meaning I'm still going to receive goods into my facility. The only opportunity I have to know it's coming is that the carrier might proactively send me a notification that it's coming, if I have the ability to do that. And this is not a 100% solution. I'm not going to be able to do this with 100% of my suppliers. So therefore, being able to manage through all of the utilization processes and all of the visibility, the cross-channel visibility, I may end up with a lower level of return on my investment for getting those getting those contracts and those carriers to haul in those lanes. So some companies will graduate from that and say, you know, I'm not going to take advantage of my supplier's ability to send me stuff. I'm going to bring this in-house. I'm going to do a lot more work with regards to this. I'm going to centralize my freight process, and I'm going to say this is an optimized, managed inbound solution. So it's all going to come collect, and it's going to come through my system and my ability to centralize that and manage that. So I'm optimizing my supply chain network, and I'm doing it through the access and use of terminals, of cross-docks, of visibility across carriers and suppliers to do this. And I'm building this network for all parties to participate in and give me the opportunity to perform some audit or perform some cost-saving structure in my business. So from my procurement organization, I'm able to see the contracts and the POs through to my break bulk terminals or my consolidation points to my carriers. We're able to communicate and have that visibility across the entire part of my supply chain. And what it would look like is a little more detailed than what we've seen before. And again, this is a high level. This could be as detailed as we want, but we're just going to take just a segment of an inbound supply chain that's optimized and say, what's the key thing that makes a difference here? And that is the ability to have folks access through my TMS, to be able to communicate through purchasing, to have the purchase orders loaded in and optimized, and communicate that optimization to my carriers and my suppliers. Having the suppliers and the carriers communicate back through this process to be able to close the loop on this activity. I have complete control and complete all of the data for us to be able to do the analysis and the audit that we require to be able to make this effective, which gives us the pros and the cons. The pros are I get to design my own network. I get to optimize it how I see fit. I get traffic has the ability to have access to everybody's activity and be able to create audits, to have that visibility, to be able to make decisions, take advantage of the supply chain to be able to consolidate shipments and determine what is of value to us that we can actually make a difference on and drive costs out and what's not. And the big part of this is I get to be able to break that cost down inside my own organization and do some real cost benefit analysis against what the true cost of transportation is against my cost of goods sold. The downside is, well, it's not a 100% solution because I may have suppliers that do not have the ability to communicate in this fashion. I may have suppliers that have to rely on third parties to communicate this information, so it's not going to be on a timely basis, or don't feel that they have it's not cost effective enough for them to be able to participate in this network that we've created, so they're going to communicate the old-fashioned way, and then we have a bunch of one-offs that fall out of this process and doesn't give us that true visibility into costs in our supply chain. And so when we look at it, we say we identified the 4 different methodologies that we wanted to talk about today that folks are using, and we understand that the goal is at the end of the rainbow would be to have the process done in the optimized inbound management solution. Well, everybody says, well, how do we get there? What's our path forward? And there is a path forward. What you have to do is first realize that where you are in this process, where you are in your maturity model to be able to sustain the upgrade to have the willingness to make the changes into your business, and from there be able to set goals to achieve that optimized model. So what we've done is at Quetica is we've always taken what we worked with companies on and have created a model for this, and we want to share what that is with you guys. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Rick Langer for him to be able to discuss with you how these companies do this path forward and what we've learned in the process of moving these companies to that optimized model. Rick, if you want to take over the controls, you can.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone. I think Chris has done a really good job of making sure everybody understood the maturity model and how it works inside of most of the enterprises. When we do client engagements, we have the opportunity to see a lot of different techniques and solutions that clients are using to help better manage their supply chain and their transportation and keep their costs down and their service levels effective. And typically, when we're looking at a client that has an opportunity to save a significant portion of money for taking on better management of their inbound transportation, what we like to do with that client is we want to look at what is the opportunity. So if a client, I was actually just meeting with a client yesterday. I think they had in the neighborhood of about 12,000 suppliers that they use. And of those 12,000 suppliers that ship into their facilities, really about 300 of them actually make up 80% of the traffic that's coming into their facilities. So as we were looking at the kind of their supplier base, it really gave us the area to focus. As Chris mentioned, the Managed Inbound program is not a 100% solution. The investments that you make into enabling your suppliers and getting carriers to support those lanes has to have the payback across enough transaction or shipment volume going into your facility. So the first thing that we look at is we want to look at the materials contracts. Most of the materials contracts that are out there now are based on a fully landed cost. In the freight terms that the vendors are using are prepaid and allowed. And so the problem is that the transportation charges that's built into the overall materials fully landed cost isn't broken out. And so what we have to do is we have to look at those contracts, we have to look at the purchase orders, we have to look at the invoices from the materials vendors, and we have to identify what areas represent the best vendors to be on a Managed Inbound program. Then we can either try to estimate based on the commodity that's being shipped, the lane, the equipment, the frequency, and take a look at what is a benchmark shipping cost for that. And we also will work through our client's procurement organization so we can reach out directly to the vendor to try to get their cost information. And as Chris mentioned, most of these materials contracts are 3 to 5 years in length. And so typically we'll see a significant risk premium that they had to build into their transportation charges. Because like any other company, fuel is pretty hard to predict over that period of time. Rate changes with their carriers are hard to predict. And so they build a fairly large risk premium into the transportation cost component of a fully landed charge. So what we'll do is we'll actually work with that materials vendor to try to get what their costs were for that contract. And then we'll try to break out that data back against the existing contract lanes that our client might have. A lot of times there'll be gaps in those lanes. And so we'll have to go out and use some of our benchmark data that we have inside of Quetica to actually benchmark those lanes and those types of shipments. And what this allows us to do then, of course, it allows us to really do a comparison between what the materials vendor has built into their cost for transportation as part of the component for fully landed versus if our client was managing it directly, what's the gap between those? And so, typically we see anywhere from a 25 to 50% gap. Sometimes we even see as high as 100% gap. So So pretty significant. The second thing that we do in the discovery part is we want to understand, what infrastructure already exists inside of our client site. So if we're going to do a fully landed cost, or if we're going to convert from a fully landed cost model to a managed inbound program, what kinds of transportation management or traffic management systems or infrastructure, process, operations do they have in place, and what kinds of investments have they already made? Because as Chris pointed out, that changes where you can fit on the capability model. And then what we do is we do a really simple return on investment and a business case that says, here's what a client could get out of a managed inbound program, and here's the overall business case to make the investment. Next, we go into a design step in the project and the process. On the design side, then we specifically say these materials vendors can clearly go into an inbound network. These material vendors can actually go into an optimized inbound network. A lot of the analysis for that is based on geographical opportunities to consolidate shipments, right? So can I have multiple vendors shipping into a cross dock, then I'm consolidating into full truckload movements or multimodal movements. And then we look at, just as importantly, what vendors don't belong in a managed inbound network. And, if there's 300 that make sense, they represent 80% of the volume. Well, in the other case, then there's 11,700 vendors that don't belong in a managed inbound network. Then what we do is based on identifying who's going to be in a managed inbound network, as well as who's in the optimized inbound network. We actually set up some algorithms where we're going to run simulations to actually design the network itself. So we'll design a straight inbound network as well as an optimized inbound network. And what we're going to do is we're going to load into our simulation engine the different constraints, the existing constraints that exist within our client's supply chain today. And we'll run a baseline that says, here's how an inbound network could exist with the current constraints. Here's how an optimized inbound network could exist with current constraints. And then what we'll do is we'll actually modify the constraints where it makes sense. If I leased a cross-dock operation in Los Angeles, for example, would that make more sense? And so what we'll do is we'll start modifying the constraints and the types of investments, and we'll come to a quantitative design of the actual inbound network, right? And the goal here is, again, getting the most cost-effective and service-oriented transportation network coming into your facilities. And then based on that, we develop a weighted factor decision model, which takes into account both quantitative and qualitative decisions. I always tell people, if you did a perfect quantitative model for Asia Pacific, you'd put a distribution center in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And everybody knows that's not going to happen. So what we do, though, is we look back at some of those qualitative factors and try to prioritize those qualitative factors. That cost might be a factor, service level might be a factor. There's other industry-specific qualitative factors that might exist as well. And so we have to identify those to say that based on this decision model, we can get to the final network design. Because remember, the simulation resimulates, relearns, resimulates, relearns to continue to refine the network. And then we use these decision factors to prioritize which one we think is going to create the best solution for the overall client. Then we have to go out and identify the lane gaps that we have between the current contracts for their outbound network and the new lanes that are going to exist for their inbound network. And then based on those lane gaps, we'll have to go out and source for those lanes to make sure that we have good transportation service providers to deliver on an inbound system. And then if there's gaps in the operations or systems infrastructure, work with our client to actually go in and solve those gaps so that we can support an inbound network as well as an optimized inbound network. And then clearly the big part of this is creating the materials creating the materials for the vendor and for the carrier communications and the training. Right, we got to make sure that the materials vendor, the carrier, all has the information required to be able to support a managed inbound program. I mean, one area we're looking at for a previous client was, we had an opportunity where they had multiple vendors in China, and we started looking at consolidation opportunities at the different ports in China, where those vendors could be shipping into a consolidation center prior to going to the port, so we could guarantee the highest container load, largest container load opportunity across optimized vendors. And so that's an example where we're getting optimized inbound supply chain network just prior to the port in China. So, and again, getting those vendors and getting the carriers to work together to create a solution that's both practical and easy to operate and reduces exceptions. On the execution side, I tell people, the most important thing to do is you want to start with a pilot, and you want to pilot both a managed inbound solution as well as an optimized inbound solution. Typically, what we do with our clients is we'll set up a pilot for a managed inbound program, and then we'll follow it with an optimized inbound network, and we'll pick some sample vendors and lanes of traffic so that we don't disrupt the supply chain, but we can go back to that business case and that return on investment and say, gee, are we starting to see the benchmark differences that we set out to accomplish in the first place? As well as, did the systems, infrastructure, and the operations that we modified, is it capable of supporting this? So it becomes pretty critical for the clients to validate and refine based on the design we have in place. We're also able to pilot some critical aspects of the new network design that we created through our qualitative and quantitative simulation and decision model. Next, what we do is we look at establishing a rollout strategy, and the key with the rollout strategy is to make sure that it makes sense within the context of the client's supply chain so that we don't disrupt their overall business activity. And a lot of times it'll be done by geography, it can be done by division, it can be done by a combination of modes, geography, and division. So the key for the strategy is to reduce as much operational risk as possible and to make sure that we have a practical way of getting to the cost savings. And then based on the rollout strategy, of course, then we go out and we communicate and train the vendors and carriers, and we migrate to an optimized managed inbound network. So that's really our approach for this type of project. It's a pretty practical solution, and it helps clients achieve some pretty significant cost savings. I wanted to give you kind of a benchmark cost savings opportunity. I think that's what a lot of people are interested in. First of all, if you have about, for every $1 billion you purchase in inbound materials, that fully landed cost, you can assume that about 10% or $100 million is the transportation cost that's embedded in the fully landed cost. And some people might say, well, Rick, gee, that seems a little high. The reality is it is higher if you're comparing it against your outbound. But if you're comparing it against what an inbound is on a 3 to 5 year materials contract, and you include that risk premium that exists, as well as your vendor's ability to negotiate the best transportation rates, it is actually closer to the 10% mark or even higher. We see about $35 million in managed inbound opportunity by eliminating that risk premium and getting to more cost-effective rates. And we also see about $10 to $15 million of additional optimization through load consolidation on average for areas of the supply chain or areas of your inbound network that we can go cross-vendor shipment consolidation and optimization. So the net is there's about $35 to $50 million for every $1 billion in materials purchased. Okay, so if your company buys $1 billion worth of widgets, you could expect that about 35 to 50 million of that $1 billion in widgets can be saved through an inbound managed network and optimized inbound managed network. So, I did see a question pop up on the screen about getting a copy of the presentation. You can actually download a copy of the white paper through the link that's on there. We'll also be posting the presentation on our website, and it'll be recorded for review. Thanks, everyone.
That concludes the presentation portion of our session. We'd now like to answer any questions. If you have a question, please enter it in the chat window to the left-hand side of your screen. If we are not able to answer all questions before the end of the webinar, we will follow up with you after the session. To access copies of Quetica's research or receive information about future sessions in Quetica's Supply Chain and Transportation Educational Series, please visit us at Quetica.com. We'd now like to start with a question for Chris. How do you audit a managed inbound invoice?
Thanks, Holly. Well, when you have an inbound invoice, you want to do a couple of things. First, you need to make sure that it is the actual event took place. So there needs to be an audit of origination, and you have to understand inside your organization what it takes for you to be able to do that. So it's not so much just, hey, look, I'm going to audit the price. I'm going to audit whether or not the accessorial charges are correct or the fuel is correct. That's one aspect of it. And a lot of times companies will take advantage of what exists out there today for with regards to payers for them to be able to provide that audit. But what you need to make sure of inside your organization that when you're in the business of receiving invoices against the purchase of goods, the transportation invoices against the purchase of goods, you need to be able to make sure that that the invoice that exists can be traced back to the actual activity and the purchase order. So if you're auditing the invoice internally, there's multiple ways of doing it. If you're auditing it externally, the one thing that you need to make sure of is are the invoices that are coming in real, and how can I take advantage of that? And the next thing is, how do I match that back to my accounting process?
Great, thanks, Chris. Here's another one for you. How do you ensure you're shipping via your carrier?
Well, that goes back to on an inbound collect process. When a company will tell a carrier or tell a supplier, I want you to use these 5 carriers for all of your activity to me, you need to be able to have the ability to audit that, because a lot of times what we see is that doesn't exist. They will use carriers over a period of time that are, 1, there, 2, easily accessible to them, and 3, have filled a void that maybe your particular carrier wasn't able to fill at a certain time. So over a period of time, if your truck didn't show up once or twice, they're going to start using another carrier. So you need to make sure that this carrier is yours. Because you went to the trouble to negotiate a rate. You went to the trouble to determine whether or not that's of value to you with regards to your cost of goods sold, and you want to be able to control that. So there are a number of things that you do in this scenario, in this inbound collect scenario, that will help your vendors or your suppliers realize the importance of selecting the right carrier, the carrier that you chose. And that is, inside your organization, have a periodic check or an audit against those carriers, and have a report that defines how often am I using the carriers. Now, the important thing is the best part of that report is that for you to be able to see the difference between what it would have cost me and what it did cost me. So you can go back to your supplier and say, you know how much more you're costing me in this process. It's easier to do that when you can give them a specific amount. And a lot of times, if you're using a payer, you have the ability to do that. And if you're doing it internally, you have to create that opportunity.
Thanks, Chris. Rick, this is a question for you. How do you analyze your costs when using fully landed costs versus prepaid and ad?
Sure, I tell customers all the time, and a lot of times this just gets kind of gooped up in their purchasing or procurement organization where they want to push everything into fully landed. Tell clients all the time that you really need to, as a minimum, even if you don't want to manage your inbound network, you need to try to push your purchasing or procurement folks towards at least prepaid and ad, because that gives you at least a relative benchmark as to what you're getting charged for the transportation costs, and you can at least be making a decision not to manage your inbound network based on what you're being charged back from your materials vendor, because you can actually benchmark that against some industry rates that we use. So the other thing I was going to mention is that every vendor has different degrees of infrastructure that they can support, and so some vendors, a managed inbound program for them is as simple as I need a routing guide. Others will be willing to access your transportation management system through a web portal, and then third, you'll also see some vendors that will actually load the routing guide right into their own transportation management system. So, the solution for the vendors isn't, one size fits all. You've got to work with the vendors to see which one makes the most sense. And the better solution you align with the vendors' overall capabilities and infrastructure, the more successful your program will be, as well as it'll avoid them using non-core carriers for the solution.
Great, thanks, Rick. Chris, how do you manage communication with the vendors?
Well, we identified in the presentation that there was a number of ways that these companies who do this inbound communicate with their supplier. I'm assuming that the question was based on their supplier that's sending them the goods that they purchased, and they do it through either simple spreadsheets and to meet the supplier's ability to communicate. If they have the ability to communicate more in a more what do they call it, technologically advanced way, then there are other methods that they can use through software, through our TMS, through theirs. And there's a number of facilitators out there that allow for this to take place, that will communicate on your supplier's behalf directly to you. So your supplier, if they don't have the ability to communicate this information or receive it from you, they could use a third-party facilitator to do this without having to lose the business. So in communicating with my suppliers on what I want them to do, there are a number of methods that I can use depending upon, and again, I use that maturity model, their ability or my ability to continuously provide that information on a regular basis that is correct.
Rick, one more question for you. How do I start if I want to optimize my network?
Sure. I mean, the first thing is to really take a look at what is the purchasing activity, and so you can really understand what your demand is back from your suppliers that are shipping into you. And then based on really understanding what that demand is, we need to be able to collect the data to understand the shipment frequency, the equipment type, the lanes that are being used, and once we've got that data, then defining the constraints of what your physical facilities and infrastructure looks like, and taking those three legs of the stool and putting them into a simulation that allows us to simulate different transportation network solutions and changing some of the constraints so that as we re-simulate, we relearn, we re-simulate, we relearn. And the simulation of that transportation network helps us understand what's the most cost-effective and service-efficient network that I can use. And so the simulations give us the quantitative data to be able to design that network, and our ability to change the constraints that exist inside the inside your physical facilities allows us to look at alternatives to see if, gee, maybe if I rented a cross dock in a different location, it might be more effective than the one where I'm renting one today. And so after performing those simulations, we're able to learn, we'll actually be able to design the network and design the network based on the both quantitative simulation learned algorithms that we conducted, but then also the quantitative factors that are most important to that client to their business model.
Thank you, Rick. That concludes our session for today. Thank you for participating. Please join us for future Quetica events.